Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We're having our daytime graduate program for electrical and computer engineering info session. My name is Jennifer Huberman, and I am the lead academic counselor for the graduate programs. That is me in Hawaii. And also with me is Mac Carter. He's our program coordinator for graduate programs. You want to say hi, Mac?
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I'll be admitting people that are coming in late.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so this is a little overview of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to review a little bit about the differences between, aside from the obvious, for the MS and PhD programs, and talk a little bit about the admissions requirements. And then we're going to have a faculty speaker, Dr. Amy Orsborn, talk about her research and a little bit about her path to graduate school. And you'll be able to ask questions at the end or throughout her presentations. You can ask questions, and then when she's done with her presentations, you'll have a chance to I'll be monitoring those through chat. And then we also have a graduate student speaker, Devin Greggs. He's a PhD student, and he'll be talking about his path as well. And then at the very end, we'll do general question and answers. So Professor Orsborn and Devin will be coming in the second half of the presentation. So at a glance, this is just our place to sort of talk about how great we are. We are very well-renowned in electrical and computer engineering programs, and we are the largest department at the University of Washington's College of Engineering. And this just is a little bit about how large our program is. This includes our daytime and our evening PMP program, which I won't focus on a lot in this presentation. I will talk about it a little bit, and May Lem, the academic director for the professional programs, does have her own information session. So I'll show you a little bit about that information as well. So these are all of our research areas. You can view these on our website. We have biosystems, data science, power and energy, robotics and controls. The research topics on the website goes into more detail about these areas and the different faculty that are associated with these areas as well. So you're welcome to take a look at all of that. A little bit about diversity. This is something we do value highly in our faculty and students, and something that we're consistently working on to improve recruiting faculty and students from a diverse background. And just so you know that this is something that obviously with things that are going on in our world, this is something that's brought even more to the forefront of our, and we're really coming up with strategies in ECE and through the College of Engineering to improve and increase our diversity. So keep that in mind. So our graduate programs, we do have an MS and a PhD program. This is our BS to MS program, which is for students who are UW undergraduate students, and you're able to apply early to the MS program and receive an admissions decision by the August before your senior year. So this is a really great way for you to start in your senior year taking graduate level classes that you'll be able to transfer when you start the graduate program. So it's up to 9 credits, and they do have their own information sessions. I don't see any on the books right now, but you can look at the ECE BSMS website, which I have at the top here, and you'll be able to see when the next information session is. And I'm happy to answer any questions about it as well, but it's just a way to shorten your time in the MS program, usually by about 1 quarter, and to sort of get a head start during your senior year, especially if you fulfilled all of the your undergraduate requirements. So that's something to think about. So this talks about our MS, which is 42 credits. You have the option to do either coursework or the thesis option. You don't need to make that decision when you apply. That's something you can decide before you start, or usually during your first or second quarter. So the thesis option is available if you're interested in doing research and doing your thesis in your final quarter. Our MS students do have the option as well to continue on to the PhD program. You will still have to apply, but it's a little bit of an abbreviated application process. You only have to have 2 letters of recommendation, including one faculty member who's willing to advocate for your admission and for funding. So this is a good option for students who are definitely interested in PhD, but maybe don't yet have any research experience, which is not required. But if you're feeling like you're unsure whether you want to do MS or PhD, and you'd like to start the MS program, you would be able to transfer up to 30 credits towards your PhD. So keep that in mind. So that's also an option. The PhD is 90 credits. We require 27 credits of dissertation. And like I mentioned before, you can transfer up to 30 credits. You are able to also earn your MS while you're a PhD student once you've met those requirements. So keep that in mind. We do have students that are interested in that, and that's a really easy process once you are admitted and are a current PhD student. So I know I'm going to go through this a little quickly because I want to make sure we have enough time for our faculty and student speakers. I know students find those parts to be extremely valuable. You're able to get sort of an inside look into what faculty are looking for in applicants and the different ways in which they review applications as well. Those are really valuable to hear. So we do have a hard deadline of December 15th for admission the following autumn. So if you're applying this year, December 15th is the deadline for autumn 2021 start. And we do notify students by next March 2021. April 15th is the national deadline, so you do have some time to make your decision about which school you would like to accept an offer for. And we don't require GRE, so that's something that I know we get a lot of questions about. Some schools are getting rid of the GRE. Our faculty don't feel it's a good indicator of whether or not a student will be successful in graduate school. So keep that in mind. The scores aren't even considered if you include them in your admissions application. So the GPA required to apply is a 3.0. We don't really like to put a GPA to be competitive because we do really look at applicants holistically, which means we don't just look at scores. We don't just say, okay, 3.5 and above gets accepted, 3.5 and below don't. We don't work that way. We're really trying to find students who have a strong interest to attend UW and ECE and have a really well-rounded background and are very interested in working with our faculty as well and learning from our faculty. 3.5 is sort of just a benchmark in order to help you be competitive, because we do have a large pool of applicants for the MS and PhD combined. We usually get about 1,200 applicants. So keep that in mind. But they don't, like I said, just look at transcript and GPA. They look at your statement of purpose. They really do look at that and want to know that they want to be able to hear about you as a person and your experiences and your background, and your letters of recommendation are really looked at as well, strongly. This just explains a little bit about the TOEFL. International applicants are required to take the TOEFL unless you meet our Memo 8 requirements to satisfy the English language requirement in another way. Another way you can do that is with a 4-year bachelor's degree in US or English taught institution. So keep that in mind. We have details about that through the Memo 8 for the UW Graduate School. And we can include that in the chat as well. I can add that link. So This just shows the application materials. I know you guys can read that on the website, but just to call out a couple of items, we don't accept materials received after the deadline. We do start our review process after December 15th, and because we have such a large amount of students applying, we need to make sure we have sufficient time to review all those applications. The materials we do require to be submitted through the online application. We don't accept any email material, as we're not able to update those materials in the online application. So keep that in mind. We do accept one time per year for the next autumn. We don't have rolling admissions. So that's one thing to be aware of when you're planning. If you're not applying for this year, to keep that in mind for next year. And let's see. So this is a little bit about our professional master's program. That's May Lim. She's the director of the professional programs. This program is really what they call the evening program. So it's coursework only. We don't have any opportunities for research during the evening program. It's for students interested in working in industry or who are already working professionals. And there's not as much there aren't as many course offerings each quarter, so keep that in mind. You may, depending on your curriculum area, not be able to take a class each quarter in that area. It just depends on what's being offered, so keep that in mind. They do have 2 application review times. The first one is January 5th. That's a little different than our program, and May 17th. So they make decisions. The priority deadline is the January 5th application. And then if you do apply by May 17th, you can still get a decision by July. And she holds regular information sessions about the professional master's program. Next one, as you can see on the slide, is Thursday, November 19th at 5 p.m. And you will have to sign up and RSVP for that, just like you did with this as well. So if you have any questions about that, you can add that in chat, and I'm happy to answer that towards the end as well. So if you don't have a degree in ECE, that's okay. We have a lot of students in different backgrounds, other engineering backgrounds, math, physics, statistics. That's not a problem. We do recommend a few EE courses to take before you start or during your first quarter to help you feel prepared and get ready to start in your grad level classes. So these are also listed on the website as well, but we called them out here just so you can review them if you haven't seen that before. A little bit about funding. So all PhD students do receive guaranteed 4 years funding. It could be in a teaching assistantship, a research assistantship, or a fellowship. It just depends on the faculty that you're going to be working with and what their funding looks like for that next academic year. They do come with a tuition waiver and a stipend and health benefits. You do have to pay a little bit in fees. So you'll be able to view that online if you are offered admission. And once you receive your funding offer, we do call out all those details in the funding offer. So you'll be able to see that. And for international applicants, in addition to the Memo 8 English proficiency requirement, you do also have to demonstrate spoken English proficiency in order to TA. So Memo 15 details all of the ways that you can meet that requirement as well, including a speak score on the TOEFL of 26. So keep that in mind, that you don't need to have that before you start, but before you're admitted, but before you start the program or during your first quarter. So keep that in mind. We don't have guaranteed funding for MS applicants, but we do encourage students to apply for fellowships and grants. We have a lot of resources available for students that I'm happy to supply those resources as well to help you find fellowships and grants. The call goes out to all current students for TA positions. You can apply in ECE or in other departments where you feel like you might be able to TA. And PhD students do get priority if they're not receiving RA funding, but if you do have a faculty member who is requesting you to be your TA, that sort of gives you a little bump as well. So that's something we say if you're very scrappy and you really make an effort and talk to faculty and say, I really enjoyed your class. I think I did well. I would like to be a TA for next quarter. That's something, a conversation you can have with faculty and hope to get the TA funding. Let's see. So we call out a little bit about student life. So you are students, you are graduate students, but we want you to get involved in things outside of academics. It really makes you a well-rounded, it really helps you stay connected with other ECE students and with other UW students, especially right now. This has been really challenging for students. So we have a lot of clubs and organizations. We have plenty of clubs that are just for fun, for networking, for getting involved in ECE or at UW. There's plenty of organizations that we have that you can get involved in. So that's something just to call out. I'm not going to go through all of them, but once you are admitted or before you apply, if you're interested to get more details about these, I'm happy to share that with you as well. And then this just sort of calls out a few of the fellowships that we regularly get information about. These are not just for PhD students. Some of these fellowships also are for MS students. So don't feel like if you're applying to the MS program that there aren't any fellowships and grants that you can apply for. There are, you just have to be really resourceful and do the research and find them. So just calling that out as something to consider as well. And then we'll stop with the questions. I'm going to stop my sharing right here and pull up and see if we have our students, any of our student speakers here, or our faculty speakers here yet. I don't see them yet, so I'm happy to ask questions while we're waiting for them to come on. I'm just looking at the participant list. Sorry, guys. Okay. So I don't see that they're here yet, which is totally fine. So here is our information. So our website, I'm sure you all know, is www.eceuw.edu. Our email address, grad@ece.uw.edu, will go to both Mac and I. So either one of us will be able to respond. Our individual emails are here, obviously, and I do hold regular prospective student drop-in sessions on Fridays at 1 p.m. Pacific time. So that's once you start really making a decision about applying and you have specific questions, you can attend the drop-in hours, and I'm happy to answer any questions. If you're not able to attend those, I know time difference can be a real challenge for students, so I'm happy to respond to the email as well. But if you would like to attend and get your questions answered, please attend the drop-in sessions, and that's on our ECE events calendar as well. So you'll be able to find the Zoom link and click on it there. So a lot of good resources for you. I know it's a lot of information to share, but I wanted to kind of go through all that information and then give you all a chance to ask your questions. And then when we have our faculty and our student presenters, you'll be able to ask them questions as well. So I see we do have one question. What's the difference between doing MS and proceeding with PhD later as compared to getting admitted into PhD directly? So I think the difference is, if you start and complete your MS degree, if you were to continue on to a PhD program, you're not able to use all of those credits. So that's one thing to consider. You are able to transfer 30 credits towards the total number of credits for your PhD program. Not towards any specific degree requirement like breadth or depth. It's just towards the total. So keep that in mind. I think one advantage to starting the MS program is, especially for students who maybe don't have any research background or experience or have any faculty that's able to speak towards any large projects that you've done in class. It can speak to your research, what faculty call your research potential. So that's something to consider. And easy, the question is how easy is it to get into PhD from MS? You definitely have more of an advantage than coming straight from the large applicant pool, because if you're currently an MS student, I'm not going to say if you're coming from the large applicant pool, you aren't going to get admitted. But when you start in the MS program, you are able to have a relationship with faculty and take classes with faculty members, and also possibly take a few research credits with faculty who, once they see your potential to do research, could be helpful when you are applying to the PhD program as well. So that's something to consider. I'm not sure easy is the word I would use. You definitely still have to go through, the full evaluation of your application and your fit to be in the PhD program. But you definitely have that advantage of knowing faculty and being able to communicate with faculty as well. So another question is, oh, thank you. I see Devin is here. So I'm just going to answer a couple of these questions just for a few minutes, and then I'll see if Professor Orsborn joins us so she can go ahead and give her presentation. So let's see, how important is undergraduate research experience for applying to MSc? Like I said, the MS, that's one of the differences between the MS and the PhD. The question is, how important is undergraduate research experience for applying to MSEE, if it wasn't clear when I was mumbling that. I think the difference in the PhD and the MS is the research. So when you're applying to the PhD program, while you're not required to have research experience, it's definitely to your advantage. I think if you do have research experience, like I mentioned, so that faculty can evaluate your research potential as a PhD student, but it's not required. And so the MS program, most of our students are coursework focused. And so research is not a requirement for the coursework option. If you're planning to do a thesis, obviously it would be good to have research experience, but again, it's not required. It's something that I know is more evaluated for the PhD students. Okay, sorry. So another question is, what is the difference between what is the difference between the BS to MS versus the MSEE? So the difference, the BS-MS is for current UW undergraduate students. You're able to apply informally before the usual application opens. So our usual application opens on October 1st. And if you're a BS-MS, applying to the BS-MS program, you're able to apply, I believe it's before your senior year in July. I believe it's in July. I pulled up that slide. And so you're able to get an admission decision early, which is a good advantage, so that if you don't get accepted to the BS-MS program, you do have the opportunity to apply during the regular application cycle as well, maybe get some experience, maybe beef up your statement of purpose, beef up your letters of recommendation, make improvements in your application, and you still are able to apply during the regular cycle. Or if you don't get accepted, that's also giving you time in order to consider maybe other schools that you might want to attend and apply for. And you're able to start taking the graduate level courses during your senior year and apply up to 9 credits. So that's a couple of the differences. So I hope that answered the question that you're looking for. So let me know if you would like some more details about that as well. Yeah, easy might have been a wrong choice of words for getting into PhD. I had to call that out a little. Okay, so another question is there any limitation of concentration for international students? No, we don't have any limitation. We also don't have official concentration. So when you're admitted in the MS or PhD program, and you're not really limited to one concentration. PhD maybe so, because you're obviously going to be doing a dissertation, and you're going to be working with faculty in a research area. But for MS students, we don't have concentrations. And so if you do have interest in one specific area, you are able to focus your coursework in that area, but you're not required, and you don't have to call it out at any point. So, and there's no limitations for international students as well. When applying to MSEE, is it the major GPA or overall GPA that is considered, or is it both? So what we do ask is for the last 90 quarter hours or 60 semester hours. So that will include a majority of your major GPA. But that's sort of how we ask for the calculation of your GPA, is the last 60 semester credits or 90 quarterly credits. And they do really value the major GPA over, I think, the overall GPA. They do consider that. Like I mentioned, we review holistically, and they do look at the transcripts and see maybe your GPA is not as high overall on the transcript, but when they're looking at the transcript and they see that your major and your upper division GPA is higher, they do consider that. What are entrepreneurship opportunities for PhD students? Well, we do have quite a bit of resources for that, and I'm happy to post some of those in the chat. We do have, it's called the Burke Center for Entrepreneurship, I believe it's called, and it's a really big center on campus that really encourages entrepreneurs. And we do have one of the highest, I'm not really sure the phrasing for this, but one of the largest numbers of students involved in startups. So that's something to consider as well. That's something that we do really value. I can give you more details about that. I'm not really answering that clearly, I'm sure, but we do have resources for that. And a lot of networking opportunities as well. So that's something to think about. What's the usual timeline to graduate in PhD? Well, I think the usual is really hard to say, because it really just depends on the pace and the projects that you're working, the research that you're working on and the dissertation that you're working on. I think we usually say between 5 to 6 years would be typical for a PhD student. It can be more, it can be less, possibly for students who already have their MS as well. So keep that in mind. There is opportunity for funding after the 4 years, but it's not guaranteed. So at that point, we definitely do try to make sure we help students find funding opportunities. If the faculty you're working with has continued RA funding, they can provide that. You're still able to apply for TA positions, and it's a good chance for you to also do a lot of research and dig deep into all of the fellowship opportunities as well, especially while you're working on your dissertation, so that you don't necessarily have the limitation of focusing on a TA or an RA position, and you're able to just focus on your research. So that's something that we encourage students to research on. And then, is there priority given to current UW BSEE applying to PhD? I don't know if it's priority, but you do have the advantage, like I mentioned before, of knowing faculty and being able to possibly get faculty, have faculty interaction before you apply. So that is an advantage. It's you're not given priority unless you have already a relationship with a faculty member and they are, know and have worked with you in the lab and are able to offer admissions and funding. That is an advantage for sure. Yeah, but we don't, give preferential treatment to UW students, but there is visibility. They do know the BSCE students. And so that, definitely comes into play. And they know the faculty who are providing the letters of recommendation. So that definitely can be an advantage. Let's see. The rest of these we might have to hold off in getting to because we're right at 5:30, and I see Professor Orsborn is here. Hello, Professor Orsborn. We are very lucky to have Professor Orsborn here to talk about her research and to talk about possibly her path to graduate school, how she ended up as a PhD student, all of the little intricacies and the different paths that people take to MS or the PhD program. Did you have any slides that you wanted to show, Professor Orsborn?
Yeah, sure. I put a few together. Just
Great. So you should be able to share them. If you're not, just let me know.
Great. Do folks see my slides?
Yes.
Great. Sorry. Whenever the Zoom menus are all, it's hard to find how to actually present. Okay. All right, so I'll try to, sorry, hold on one sec. All right. I want to keep this a little somewhat short because I think hopefully sort of more informal discussion will be a little more useful for folks. But to kind of give you a little bit of background on what I do and what my research is. So here at the University of Washington, I'm part of our team that focus on neural engineering. And I like to think of that as trying to repair and understand sort of the ultimate electrical system. And those are the electrical systems inside of our bodies, our brains and spinal cords. And broadly speaking, neural engineering is really about building interfaces between man-made electronics and the nervous system. So we call those neural interface systems. And which have all sorts of different potential applications. So you may be familiar with, for instance, kind of ways that neural interfaces are changing how we treat neurological disorders. Things like cochlear implants have microphones, for instance, that pick up sound, transmit that sound into electrical stimulation delivered to the nervous system that then can restore hearing to those that are deaf. You can also do read out neural activity from a patient who's paralyzed to actually restore movement. And that's the type of neural interfaces that I work on. And then there's sort of basically any neurological disorder could in principle be treated with a neural interface. So for treating blindness, there are retinal prostheses that are being developed, and things like neuropsychiatric disorders like anxiety and depression can also be treated with stimulation and other devices. In addition to healthcare applications, kind of much more broadly, neural interfaces have a lot of potential to just kind of change the landscape of how humans interact with technology. So rather than, you could imagine a future where instead of using physical keyboards and mice to interact with our devices, you instead kind of have direct pathways through a neural interface. And while this sounds a little bit science fiction, increasingly companies are really starting to get interested in this broad idea. So both like big companies like Facebook and Microsoft have divisions that are interested in these brain-computer interfaces. And then there's companies like Elon Musk's Neuralink that you may have heard about, and other startup companies like Control Labs that was actually bought by Facebook that are trying to build these sort of new interfaces between people and technology. And so, like I mentioned, my research really focuses on kind of primarily the healthcare applications of how we build neural interfaces to restore motor function. And so the basic idea of these is that if you have someone who's paralyzed due to a spinal cord injury or damage in the nervous system at some portion of the nervous system, that you could record activity from the healthy parts and then use that to control an external device like a computer cursor. And so these technologies have been around for a little while now, and have made really kind of impressive strides. And so what I'm about to show you is a video of a woman who was paralyzed from, I believe, about her shoulders down. And she received some neural implants into the motor cortex areas of her brain. And those signals are being picked up by these wires on the top of her head, and then routed out to a computer, and then are going to control this robotic limb. And so what you can see in the video is that she's actually able to make movements again and do something like feed herself again, which is really exciting. And so these are sort of proof of concept that show that this technology has a lot of promise, but we're still kind of a long way from taking this technology into kind of broad, applying it to kind of broad applications of people. And so one of the, so my work kind of focuses on a couple of important questions of how we would improve performance in these brain-machine interfaces. And so I do experiments where I actually build these types of neural interfaces. I don't work with humans, I work with animal subjects in sort of a preclinical animal model, but we then sort of actually do neural measurements where we record activity from their brains, and then we build decoding algorithms to have them control external devices like computer cursors. And then kind of finally, they have some sort of feedback about how that device is moving. And that kind of creates this closed loop interaction between the brain and the device. And so a lot of my work is sort of studying how the device is interacting with the brain, and then also understanding how the brain, because our brains are very good at learning, how potentially we could use the brain's ability to learn to improve performance. And so just kind of to give you some flavors of the type of work that we do, it really sort of spans a lot of different aspects of electrical engineering, because we're interested in kind of this whole system. And so we do some work that's actually related to kind of machine learning and signal processing, where we're trying to build adaptive decoding algorithms and sort of smart machine learning that can track changes that are happening in the brain as the user might be learning. And some interesting directions that we're trying to explore here are moving from kind of smart ways to do this that we've currently exist when you're controlling something simple like a computer cursor, but how you do that when you're trying to control that like detailed robotic limb that you saw in the video is actually much harder. So these are kind of open questions. Then we're also really interested in this question of how, if you have a machine learning agent, how that interacts with the brain's learning as well. And so we call this co-adaptation, where you kind of have two learners that are interacting together. And so we do a lot of work trying to understand kind of the interactions between these two, and also build algorithms that could actually sort of shape the brain's learning in a smart way. So this actually touches a little bit on kind of control theory and a variety of other things. And then The last piece of our work that I kind of want to mention is a little bit more focused and rooted actually in kind of basic questions of neuroscience, of trying to understand the details of the learning that's happening in the brain as that happens in these interfaces. And that's is ultimately, I think, really important for kind of improving these devices and potentially opening up new application spaces as well. And so with that kind of super broad overview, I guess the last thing that I'll say before we open it up to questions would be a little bit about kind of how I got here. And I think, so I'm someone that I pretty much stayed I had a very direct path academically, in the sense of I kind of went straight from undergrad to PhD to a postdoc to faculty. And I've kind of done research all along the way, but the research that I've done has kind of varied a little bit. So it took me a little while to sort of find this area of neural engineering. So I actually did my undergrad in engineering physics. And I did kind of a variety of different summer research experiences, but actually in like very different areas. So the first research I ever did was actually in a particle accelerator, kind of very, very different from anything related to brains. I really kind of learned about neural engineering pretty late in my undergrad, but it immediately just sounded super interesting to me. And so it kind of drove me to research to look at around and find what research was happening. And that ultimately led me to applying to grad school, because at that time, especially, there were basically no companies doing this kind of work. It was all happening kind of in the research space. And so I decided to do a PhD, and I went into bioengineering because it seemed like kind of the right space for me to learn a little bit more about the neuroscience aspects of neural engineering. And so I did a PhD at UC Berkeley. And so there I did a lot of work kind of on brain-machine interfaces and actually building these systems. I started learning how to make measurements from the brain and all of that kind of stuff. And I developed a lot of this work on adaptive decoding. And I found that I kind of just really enjoyed the research environment. And so I kind of wanted to stay in that research space. But I also wanted to kind of really deepen my expertise in kind of an interdisciplinary way. So I felt like I knew a lot about engineering, but I wanted to kind of understand a little bit more about neuroscience. And so that led me to a postdoc, which is sort of a professional research position that you do after a PhD to gain kind of a little bit more in-depth training. And so I did this in a lab that sort of studies pretty much pure neuroscience. And then finally, that ultimately led me here. So I've been here at UW for about 2 years now, starting my own lab. So I kind of just really enjoyed the research and was really excited to have an opportunity to develop my own research questions as a professor, and then also to kind of teach these new exciting topics to others. So, yep.
Great, thank you so much. That was a really very informative and answered a couple of questions I was going to ask you about your path to PhD. So thank you. So for the prospective students that are on the line, if you guys have questions for Professor Orsborn, please put it in the chat, and I'm happy to read them out and to the group so that we can all hear your questions and get the information. I have my own questions if nobody else has questions. But if now's your chance to get an inside perspective from an ECE faculty member about her research, about the admissions process. And one thing I like to ask faculty when they're in these presentations is, if you could talk maybe a little bit about your process when you evaluate applicants for either the MS or the PhD program, and what's the difference? I know we had a couple prospective students that were asking about the need for research experience for PhD. And that was asked a couple of times. So if you maybe can speak to how you evaluate and what's the difference when you evaluate MS and PhD, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. So when I'm thinking about an applicant, obviously research experience is useful. As someone that, I mentioned that most of my research experience prior to my graduate work had nothing to do with the research I ultimately did in my PhD. And so I sort of am not necessarily looking for someone to have already worked in the spaces of like the research that my lab does. But I do think that it's really great for people to have experience doing research if possible, because it sort of gives some sense of how you would approach questions, right? So kind of demonstrating particular skills, like we do a lot of programming in my lab, and so just as an example of a skill that has nothing to do with neural engineering specifically, right? But that I might be looking for in an applicant. So that's one example. And then in terms of how I evaluate MS versus PhD, I think for me, it's less necessarily about the specific experience that I would see, on your resume. It's more for instance, when you're thinking about like the personal statement that like we ask folks to write. In a PhD, I would be looking for someone who, some sign that you've sort of thought very carefully about kind of your next steps and your interests, and kind of why do you want to do a PhD, which is a much more in-depth research experience than a master's. And so I think that to me is part of what makes the PhD application stand out among the pack, is sort of a clear sense of what makes you excited about this research, and kind of why do you want to pursue a PhD. And I think that sort of clear articulation is a little bit different, right, for a PhD versus a master's, which is a shorter experience in terms of research that is sometimes more of a stepping stone kind of along the way. Yeah, I hope that sort of helps answer your question.
Yes, that definitely does help answer the question. Thank you so much. Another question, since I'm not seeing any courageous students asking questions, I do have another question. We often get students who are asking about outreaching to faculty, especially this tends to be more related for the PhD students, but is having a connection to a faculty member, how important is that in your admissions decisions and in your evaluation of applicants? And if students aren't receiving a response from a faculty member, what could be some next steps or some recommendations you can give in that situation?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think that most, if you already have some sort of connection or have either met with a faculty member previously or had some good email exchanges with them, that certainly can be helpful, but it's not necessary it's not a prerequisite for admissions at all. So the admissions, are handled largely by a committee, so not necessarily every single faculty member is individually going in and looking at the applications, and so therefore it's not critical to kind of have that direct contact, but it certainly can be helpful. I think where it, so I think usually, so if you're, trying to reach out to faculty and you're not getting much response, I wouldn't despair that it means that, you're not going to be admitted. I think that, and often what is, at least in my experience personally, often what happens is that actually the contact would be more likely to happen sort of after the application stage, where maybe a faculty is interested in your application and then they reach out to you because they want to learn a little bit more. And it certainly can be helpful if, like, when I go to send you an email, I see that you already sent me one, and then I have even a little bit more information. And then in terms of kind of strategies for getting more information, I think, certainly looking at like faculty websites, I think is really useful to get kind of the latest up-to-date information. Unfortunately, often, websites are about publications, which are about the work that's already been done and not as much about the work that's ongoing. So there's always a little bit of a lag in that information. And so if, for instance, you, through either your friends or colleagues have, maybe connections with like the grad students that are currently in that lab, that's another avenue to sort of gain a little bit more information. And in some cases, that's often what I actually will do. If folks are interested in my lab, I sometimes actually will put them in touch with my grad students, because in some ways, I think it's more informative for them to get a sense of what it's like to be a grad student in my lab by talking to the grad students in my lab, as opposed to just to me. So that's the other avenue I would suggest for getting more information.
Yes, I definitely recommend that to prospective students, because that, like you mentioned, that's actually a great way to get an idea of what actually happens in the lab from a student experience, not just from your experience. So I think that can be really, really valuable for students. And a lot of times graduate students are very open to responding, because if you're going to be admitted to the program and in the lab with them working regularly, they definitely want to be able to give as much information as they can as well. And a student did ask, for PhD admissions, do students get accepted to a particular lab, or do you do rotations and find a suitable lab?
Yeah, so usually the admissions are a little bit more direct admission into a lab, or at least there is, if you are admitted, it means that there is at least one lab, that is interested in working with you. Often it's more. And so if it's more, then, it becomes your choice of meeting with those faculty and understanding who you would be interested in working with. Ultimately, but there's not a formal rotation plan, unless, for instance, if you were in a position where several faculty have reached out to you and are interested in your application, you could in principle sort of talk with those faculty and say that, I'm interested in gaining a little bit of experience in both of your labs, and see if there might be options for something like a rotation. But there's not a formal mechanism for that. There are fellowships from the department that are also are offered to sort of to applicants that were particularly interested in recruiting, and those would then also provide financial support for your first year that also kind of give you some flexibility. So I had a graduate student, for instance, that was admitted with one of those fellowships, and she was interested in 2 labs, mine and another lab, Sam Burden, and she basically did rotations in the first 2 quarters between those 2 groups, supported by the fellowship, and then ultimately decided that she wanted to be co-advised. And so we designed a project. And I think that was sort of a goal that she had from the beginning, but it worked out well to kind of have that structure.
Thank you so much. So we did have another question for you, Professor Osborne. I'm really interested in neural engineering, but I'm having a hard time deciding between pursuing that versus some of the other popular fields in ECE. What were some of the things that motivated you to pursue it? And do you have any tips that might help a student like me decide?
Yeah, so for me, I think the main things that motivated me towards neural engineering, well, it was two things. One, it's partly the sort of the application. So I personally find it very edifying to think about developing these technologies that could improve the quality of life for people that have a variety of different neurological disorders. But then kind of intellectually, I was a physics major that thought biology, the applications of biology were really interesting, but I hated like memorizing things. And I always thought of biology as sort of this not very quantitative field. And so I took a class that showed me how you can actually model a neuron like an RC circuit. And that just kind of hooked me that like, this is actually really cool. And I then kind of got led down this path of neural engineering and computational neuroscience, and it kind of opened up a whole new world. So I sort of got hooked for those two reasons, that it was a combination of kind of applications I found personally motivating with like questions that I thought were intellectually really interesting. And so, and then in terms of kind of thinking about how to, choose an area, I think, to some extent, I think it's always really important to, find questions that you find, particularly for a PhD level, for instance, where it's a topic that you're going to be studying pretty intensely for a long period of time. Choosing those things based on kind of what is a question that when you hear about it, you just want to learn more, right? I think is one piece. And then kind of thinking more strategically about kind of, job opportunities and other things like that. I think the other is to find questions and areas that where kind of you'll learn a really broad skill set that are applicable in a variety of different ways to sort of, so that if your interests change over time, or maybe the landscape of industry changes over time, that you have a great skill set that allows you to kind of flexibly move. And so neural engineering, even though a lot of the things that we do in my lab day to day are really specialized, I also, I do machine learning and signal processing and other things that are kind of very core central questions that are kind of broadly applicable in a variety of ways. And so I kind of picked up a lot of skills that are generally useful, even though I was doing that sort of very specialized research.
Great, thank you so much. And if nobody else has questions for Professor Osborne, we'll let you go on to your research and have a chance for our graduate student, our PhD student, Devin Griggs, have a chance to talk about what lab he is in, the work he's doing, and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions to him about how he got to graduate school and his path to a PhD as well. So thank you so much for coming to talk. I know the students find the part with faculty and staff, with faculty and students, the most valuable in these info sessions. So I really appreciate it. I know they do too. We're getting lots of thank yous.
Yep. Sure,
Thank
yeah, happy to. And I believe my email's up on the department website. So
Yes.
Feel free to send me an email if you have more questions.
And I can add it in the chat as well. I'll add it in the chat for everybody.
Yeah.
Great.
All right.
Thank you. Okay. So Devin, thank you so much. I have my slide here. I don't know if you have any slides that you wanted to show, but I have a little bit about the information that you sent, and if you wanted to go ahead and talk about your path to graduate school and the work that you're doing in the lab with Professor Yazdan.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I did make a few slides that I think will go over most of what's here. So I'll go ahead and share that.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much.
So when I was asked to join this, it sounded like I was supposed to kind of give a case study about myself. So hi, my name is Devin Griggs, and I have a face, but I'm in the lab, and I'm trying not to breathe on everybody. So I'll just share a bit about what I'm doing now, and then share a bit about my story. And if you have questions, great. And if not, that's fine too. My lab is called the Neural Engineering and Rehabilitation Design Lab, and those were very strategically chosen. It's led by Professor Azadeh Yazlan Shamarad. She is 1/3 ECE, and she's 2/3 bioengineering as far as her professorship here at University of Washington. This is a picture of some of our lab members on the American Heart Association Wear Red Day. And this is supposed to trace out a bit of a heart shape, but if you don't see it, that's fine. It's one of those engineers trying to take a cool photo sort of things. This is a figure that's probably going to be submitted in a paper here pretty soon about some of the research that I do. We are interested, similar to Professor Orsborn, and it turns out that the two guest speakers have pretty similar work. So UW does do a lot more than just neural engineering, but here's some more neural engineering stuff. We are designing a large-scale electrode array that's also transparent so that we can learn more about the brain, and in particular, learn more about monkey brains. You can only do so many experiments ethically with humans, but when you move to animals, we still have to be ethical, of course, but we have a little bit more flexibility when we work with animals. So what we're particularly interested in is studying stroke. That's the American Heart Association stuff on the previous slide. And we want to both measure what the brain signals give before stroke, during stroke, after stroke, but we also want to be able to look at the brain and actually see what's happening with different imaging methods. So I thought that I'd share this figure that I've spent a lot of time putting together for a publication that I'm hoping to get out later this year or early next year. You can see I've got some nice close-up pictures, and one of just to dive into the details just a little bit, we are introducing what we're calling a light blocking layer, which is basically a false wire and false electrode printed directly above the true wire and the true electrode. And the idea is so that when this is on the surface of the brain and we shine light down into the brain for imaging or whatever, we're hoping to reduce the amount of photoelectric artifacts by having most of the light hitting the light blocking layer and getting absorbed there. And this is particularly important when we're shining lasers into the brain to activate genetically altered neurons to do interesting things. So that's kind of a whole lot all at once, but I just thought I'd share some details because this is the type of stuff that you all will be talking about if you jump into a PhD program. Of note, especially for those who are more industry minded, we are in a collaboration with a company called Ripple Neuro to design and print these electrode arrays. So just throwing that out there as a little teaser that yes, there are some companies that work with industry partners in order to do this or that or the other thing. And if that's something you have in mind, it's sure something you can talk about with whoever your advisor ends up being. To give a little bit more context about how this is going to be put on the brain, because you can't just tape this down and call it good. You've got to have a little bit more of a setup. I'm designing a chronic interface, so something, an implant that will be screwed down to the skull. We've got a molding process to take that array we saw previously and make it into a little cup shape like this. And then this cup shape fits into, we call this the chamber. And we'll look something like this. This is a 3D print, a plastic 3D print, just to see how things are getting put together. And then we haven't officially made all of the other parts for our custom design for our monkey yet, but the stack up would look something like this, where we've got our, we're calling this the multimodal dura because there's something around the brain your brain right now called a Dura, and we're making an artificial version of it. And it's got multiple modes, multiple things it can do. And this is record electricity, and it can also allow light to pass through for taking pictures and things like that. So this is more details than you wanted to hear, but this is just a snapshot at the sort of stuff that you might be doing if you come to the University of Washington, getting really deep into the details, doing things that you never thought that you need to do. For example, I now know a little bit about SolidWorks. I feel like a mechanical engineer now. I never touched SolidWorks because as an undergrad, I was in EE. And I was honestly a little bit affronted that my professor would ask me to do that lowly ME work. But here I am. And hopefully we'll be able to get this printed in titanium and implanted and be able to record some great brain signals from some monkeys here pretty soon. And speaking of the monkeys, other things that I didn't expect to do when I was coming into a PhD program was train monkeys to play video games. So I couldn't get a video for you, but this is from a publication that came out or is coming out very soon. It's in press right now, of a cage-side tablet-based video game system so that the monkeys can learn how to play the video games while they're in their home cage. And when they're successful, this is a fish feeder that we fill up with treats. And then when the monkey successfully plays the video game, the fish feeder activates and then some treats fall down into a feed tray there so that the monkeys can get rewarded for playing their video games, which in this case is just touch the green circle, not the black on the outside. So we're getting there. We're getting there as far as the video games go. But I do work with monkeys on a pretty much a daily basis. They do smell bad. They don't always do what you want them to do. They're like the cross between a pet and a little kid because they got hands. They grab I have personal protective equipment, and they grab it. They know which pocket I keep the treats in. I've had them rip part of my jacket off and pull that pocket of treats into the cage and then start eating the treats in front of me. So again,
you mean they don't understand personal space?
No, they don't get it. They just don't get it. And some of you might be like, wow, you actually work with monkeys and you're an electrical engineer. Yes, another thing that I didn't really understand that I would be doing before I joined the PhD program. So this is kind of a pitch, like talk with your professor, like what sort of things are you actually going to be doing on a day-to-day basis? This is a really big deal. All right, so that's what I'm doing now. And now that I'm telling it to you all, it sounds really strange, but I'll go ahead and share how I got there right after I share a little bit more about the lab. So my work seems like really specific, but there is a bigger picture of the lab as a whole. And because remember, we're trying to study stroke and stroke recovery. Are there creative ways we can stimulate the brain to help the brain recover faster than it would otherwise? Those sorts of questions. And I get to work with some other people in the lab who are helping us toward that end. For example, Tiffin, she is developing the next generation of electrodes. We want to have more electrodes. We want them to be smaller, but we still want to be able to have that optical access to the brain so that we can take cool pictures and be able to use light to stimulate the brain to do interesting things. Also, Karim, he is developing the stroke model. If we're going to study stroke, we need to have a model for stroke, and I've been working with him to develop that. And then Julian, who has not shown up to any of our Wear Red Day pictures, and I'm just a little bit bitter about it. He is developing really cool computer programs to study the connectivity in the brain and how that changes over time and how it changes with respect to different sorts of brain stimulation. So all together, we make a lab that is trying to pursue solutions to stroke. And hopefully we can eventually get some of these solutions into people in feels like the distant future, but that's just because I'm neck deep in PhD school right now. So how did I get to this strange place? Well, I'll just briefly jump through my personal story, and where Professor Osborne had a very linear story as far as her academic path, I did not. And where she had a more varied experience as far as research, I had a pretty straight line experience as far as research goes. So I'm kind of the flip of her. I started with a Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering at the University of Portland, and I graduated in 2014. So I'm 27 years old. I might be a little bit older than some of you more classic folks. This is no longer their logo, but that was a logo when I was there. And then after I graduated graduated Portland, and then went to the Boeing company, I was given a book. And this book was called The Future of the Mind by Dr. Michio Kaku. And after I read that book, I was hooked on neuroengineering. I wanted to learn about brain-computer interface. I wanted to learn how the brain works. How cool is it that the most complicated machine, the most complicated system in the known universe exists between your ears? Like that's just fantastic. And I want to go learn more about that without sacrificing my background as an electrical engineer. So with that, I applied to and was rejected from University of Washington right here, as well as Stanford and UC Berkeley, and that was in 2015. And oh boy, that was a slap in the face. I felt dejected. That was an awful feeling. But I'm here now, so it ends well. But do know that people can get rejected, and it does really suck. So I continued to work at the Boeing company, and I worked there for about 4.5 years. I started long enough after the 787 battery fire that wasn't a big issue in the news anymore. And I left a bit before the 737 MAX crashes started happening. So I was in a nice, like, happy in the middle period where the stocks were going up. So I encourage you to find a company that you can time things like that, but you can't know the future. Of note, when I left the Boeing company to start here, I was making about $86,000, just for reference. During that time, I got Boeing to pay for a part-time master's program at University of Washington Bothell campus because Seattle campus didn't want me. And that was really good. That's where I gained my first research experience. I didn't gain any research experience at my undergrad institution. And it became apparent to me that if I was going to get accepted into a PhD program, it would be a really big help if I had research experience. And I was able to get that at the master's program of electrical engineering at UW-Bothell. And I was able to do this part-time in the evening. And I lived up in that area. So all those kind of worked. I lived up in that area. I worked up in that area. So it all just worked out for me to do that. Then after that, I reapplied to the ECE PhD program here at UW-Seattle. And this time I was accepted, and it was a joyous occasion. Now, you may note that I did not apply to any of the other schools here. Well, that's because personal things happened. I was in love with a lovely woman, and she lived here, and she wasn't likely to move anywhere else. So I was kind of one and done with those applications. And ended up working out. I'm married. Happy for that. During this application process, though, I don't want you to think that I just resubmitted an application and it was square. I resubmitted an application, and then I met with my now advisor, Professor Azadeh Yazdan Shamaran, and oh boy, so I'm in love with a woman here, but it felt like I was dating somebody else. Since I lived in the area, I took as much opportunity as I could to make sure that I would drive down to campus. I would meet with her in her office. I'd continue to tell her how excited I was about what was going on in her lab, and that I wanted to join, continuing to learn about what her vision for the lab was, what her vision was for my project. And clearly I didn't fully understand that based on how surprised I am that I'm working with monkeys and designing implants in SolidWorks like a mechanical engineer. But hey, it all turned out well. And I started the PhD program in 2018, so I'm about 2 years in, and I'm now making $36,000 a year or thereabouts. So do notice that there's about a $50,000 difference between these two numbers. And I'm not bringing this up to try to discourage people to join a PhD program, but I'm talking about all these crazy things because I want you to have a really good understanding of the opportunity as well as the cost of the opportunity of doing a PhD program, whether it be here or somewhere else. So those are the main things that I wanted to say. So I'll say thank you very much for letting me talk your ear off for a few minutes, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that I can.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. And I think hearing about the difference between Professor Osborne's path to PhD and your path to PhD is really helpful, because I do think that some students, when they're applying, do feel like if I don't have a particular area of research or focus, or know that I want to be a PhD student, that I shouldn't apply. And I think when I do these information sessions, it's all over the map how students get to MS or the PhD program, and their backgrounds are so different, and where they come from, where they live, and the schools that they go to are so diverse, different states, different countries. It's really exciting to hear the difference for all students, and how we have such a rich diversity of experiences and backgrounds that I think it just makes it that much more valuable here. So I really appreciate it. But I know we do have one student, and I see a question right here is, how is the day in the life as a MS or PhD student like? What is this? I think they're asking about what's the schedule like as a MS student versus being a PhD student. What would be the differences you noticed in your regular day-to-day?
I'm glad you asked. As a master's student, let me go back to here. As a master's student, I was part-time. So I would work a full day at the Boeing company, and then I would drive to class, and then I would be at class, and then if I wasn't driving to class, then I'd be doing homework. And I admit that for those 3 years, even though it was a part-time master's program, I really did not do much besides schoolwork and work. I somehow managed to date my now wife through that time.
Yeah, I was
She
just going to
very
say,
gracious.
you did get engaged and married. So you did find a good balance, which I think is something I did talk about in the presentation, how important it is to have that balance. And it looks like even though you were pulled in a lot of different directions, you were able to have a life.
Yeah, have a life in some respects. Now, if your idea of having a life is, I don't know, going out to this or that or the other thing, then you might feel a little bit isolated. But I knew what I wanted, and I pursued it, and now I'm here. I might not be able to tell you who was on the top hit 40 during those years, but I'm okay with that. So for me, again, unique experience because I was working full time and I did part time here, and I didn't do much besides that. And that's all I have to say there. Now that I'm a PhD student, it's really nice that I have one job instead of what feels like 2 jobs. But that one job is more than a 40-hour week. I usually show up by 8, and I'm the odd early one. I'm the early bird because I show up and get going at 8. But at the Boeing company, it was standard to show up at 6, if not earlier. So I feel really out of place that I'm the early bird at 8 o'clock. And I try to leave at 5. As you can see, at 6:20, this sort of thing happens. But I have a really supportive wife, and we communicate well. So that's okay. I used to be pretty good about keeping work out of the weekends, I have not been as good about that recently. But to the bigger question of what does the day-to-day kind of schedule look like? It depends on how hard and how fast you want to push. And I don't mean that as a, if you're not pushing harder and faster than everyone else, then somehow you're failing. I mean that that's something that you kind of have to decide for yourself. And to be honest, you're going to have to work with your advisor to decide that too. Now, I remember having a conversation with my advisor recently, just a tag up, like, how are things going, sort of thing, big picture. And one of the things that I said was, thank you so much for not putting me on any new projects. Like, I have enough right now, and I'm not going to be able to get through them any faster if you add more projects on my plate. So that comes down to an individual lab thing, individual work styles and things like that. So it's going to be a lot of hard work, and I want you to be aware of that before you go into it. I don't want this to be an escape from that finding a job thing that you didn't want to do. If that's your motivation for joining a PhD program, I would definitely suggest you reconsider. Even just looking at the money thing, like $50,000 times 5 years, that's $250,000. And if you were to invest that at 6% for 30 years, that's a lot different than if you were to wait 5 years before you start. So do consider the opportunity costs before you join any sort of program, I would say. So that might have been a longer and more circuitous answer than you were looking for, but I'm hoping that was helpful.
Thank you so much. So we did have another student who's asking, how invasive are the electrodes that your lab has created? I'm assuming they are tiny, so not as invasive. That's the question.
Oh, good question. Good question. In our lab, we are interested in laying electrodes on top of the brain. So nothing would be poking into the brain. Now, it will be invasive in that we'll be screwing this chamber to the skull, and there will be what we call a craniotomy, an opening in the skull, so that we can look down and see the brain. I decided not to put that image here because I'm not sure what sort of how people feel about things like that. But we'd have a craniotomy. This is about a little over 2 centimeters, so about an inch diameter craniotomy, looking down at these electrodes and the brain underneath. Now, there are other labs that do have more invasive electrodes that it looks like a little tiny spear with electrodes on it that you kind of stick into the brain. And that's important because the brain is more than just the very surface. The brain has multiple layers of the cortex, and even below the cortex, there's even more brain that's even harder to get to. But the short answer to your question is this invasive? Yes, because we're literally looking at the brain once we get these implanted. But is it as invasive as it could be? No, we wanted to stay away from that, at least in this stage of the research.
Great. Thank you so much, Devin. I am very aware of your time and our students' time. So if anybody has any last questions for Devin, please post it in the chat. And you're also, please feel free to email me at grad.uw.edu, and I'm happy to pass along any questions you may have as well to Devin if you had specific questions that we're not able to get to.
Well, great. Thank you very much for inviting me, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. This is really helpful. Like I mentioned to Professor Osborne, this is the, I think the most educational and most valuable part of the information session is really getting your perspective and a faculty perspective about being in the program, getting into the program, what the experience is like. So I really appreciate that. And I know the students do as well. So thank you so much. And I hope you're able to leave and go home now.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I'll go ahead and drop off.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining. Like I said, please feel free to email Mac and I, grad@ece.uw.edu, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. or you can attend the information sessions Fridays at 1 p.m. and you can find a specific standard time, and you can find the links on our website. So thank you all. Have a good night or a good day, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you.